Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another special episode of the IAM CX Podcast. I am your host for the day, Roger Nicholas, the Director of Customer Experience at Island Analytics and Marketing, or as we like to say, IAM for short. And we have a really special guest here today and a really special topic. But before we get into that, the core thing of everything we do at IAM is based on behavioral science and data. And that behavioral science and data in customer experience, for instance, helps us first understand how customers and employees' needs or expectations are, and then provides us with the data that allows us to either predict behavior or design strategy that'll improve things for customers, the employees, as well as the business. Well, today, we are diving into behavioral science and data when it comes to how people improve in their sales performance, in their leadership, or what they call leadership advocacy. So this is going to be a very, very special edition. And we titled this edition, The Science of Sales and Advocacy, The Hidden Barriers to Performance. You will be so happy that you came in today. So our guest today is really special, really excited to have her here. So glad she said yes to our crazy cause. Our guest today is Ms. Trelitha Bryant, who has served as a theoretical and applied research analyst at BSRP, or Behavioral Science Research Press, and she's completed an extensive volume of research projects and constructed hundreds of statistical models associated with the influence of impaired social contact initiation, or the scientific term, sales call reluctance, and on building clientele. So at present, Ms. Bryant directs the world's largest database on sales call reluctance, and she's also one of the principal co-developers of BSRP's flagship assessment, the SPQ-FSA. Ms. Bryant also developed the predictive algorithms for actionable reports that are used by organizations globally in more than 40 different countries, all right? That helps to forecast probable level of sales performance. During her tenure, Ms. Bryant has presented numerous research studies at the Southwestern Psychological Association and the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. And Ms. Bryant has also been a keynote speaker for the Society of Applied Multivariate Research, and she has presented BSRP research at numerous management level training events in the US, Europe, and Australia. Prior to joining BSRP, Ms. Bryant served as a survey researcher for the Undersecretary of the Navy, Total Quality Leadership Office. While there, she helped organize and direct the largest Navy-wide study of quality leadership practices ever conducted. Ladies and gentlemen, we only bring the best for our guests, okay? All right, so she also collaborated in survey research training and co-authored a Navy handbook on total quality leadership. Trelitha has earned her Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics from Creighton University and has done graduate study at Southern Methodist University. Lifelong learner and interested in making sure that we understand the things that inhibit sales and motivational influences associated with sales productivity. Please give a warm IAM CX welcome to Ms. Trelitha Bryant. And if this were poetry, we'd be giving you snaps. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and participate in your podcast, which I think are a beautiful service that you're offering.
Great, thank God. We appreciate that. And our audience seems to appreciate that too. You know, this started out as a project to educate the Caribbean, but it's now expanded into Europe, Africa, Middle East, the Far East, and of course the US. So we're very excited about its growth and its reception. Just to kind of, before we jump into questions, I want to try to frame our audience's reference and get them thinking a particular way. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you knew this, but did you know that there's measurable, verifiable, evidence-based science behind how people improve performance? We've all heard of different types of sales trainings or personality assessments and that type of thing. This is not that, right? But you'll find that out shortly. But Trelitha, let me jump into the first question very quickly. Now, the book that you co-authored, Relentless, The Science of Barrier Busting Sales, um, the foundation of that book is out of 40 years of scientific research done by Dudley and Goodson. That's over four decades ago. Could you help our audience understand, first of all, what is called reluctance or advocacy management? Could you define that for us?
Yes, car reluctance is that tendency we have to avoid opportunities to meet new people or even to engage with people we already know when our purpose is to promote something that is important to us. And that could be products or services, that could be a plan or a proposal, but it's an opportunity where you're seeking buy-in from others. And most people have some hesitancy to engage in prospecting or promoting activities. For example, let's say you are a small business owner and you're attending a networking event. However, you avoid opportunities to engage with people who you consider to be very prestigious in some way or maybe affluent because of your own feelings of being socially intimidated. And there's a very interesting thing about fear, about car reluctance. We must understand that this fear is not rational. It's an emotional phenomenon, and it causes us to act opposite of our best interest, regardless of what our goals might be.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So we're getting very deep here. Okay. So what about the findings from Dudley and Goodson 40 years ago that made it groundbreaking then?
It's really a very interesting process how this all evolved. The research on car reluctance began with a need, and that need was to solve a problem. Dudley and Goodson were working in the insurance industry, and the problem that they were faced with was to understand, why is it that motivated, talented, goal-directed, and well-trained salespeople, why is it that they don't sell more than they do? And so they were tasked with tackling this question because it appeared to the organizational leaders is that we should be getting more productivity from our sales force. And there were even some salespeople who were called zero producers because they literally didn't engage in productivity or sales at all. They had no activity whatsoever. Now, what made their research so groundbreaking was that they uncovered this missing link that inhibited people from engaging in contact initiation with potential buyers, because we understand that that's important if you're going to generate sales. You must have someone to talk to be communicating with.
Yeah.
However, they specifically were able to also identify 12 distinct patterns of car reluctance. And at the time, the psychological literature would use terms such as shyness or timidity to describe these behaviors. And Dudley and Goodson were able to specify in more detail and operationally define exactly what this fear is in a way that people could relate to and understand, and then began to do something about it.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's I could identify with that a lot. While I have I'm afraid to say it out loud, it's a big number, almost 30-year career in sales. My first year in sales was pretty cumbersome. Not for lack of knowledge or training, simply because my approach just didn't fit for me. And I prepared a lot. It took me a long time to analyze everything before I started talking to people, and before you knew it, I had very little people to talk to. So I could identify with that. That's since changed, but we'll get into that later. So So are these findings from 40 years ago still applicable today? And what was it, why was it necessary to do a sequel to that research in your book, Relentless?
Well, let me also add this to the research that Dudley and Goodson engaged in. And you described a perfect example of a form of car reluctance where you engage in excessive activities aimed at preparing to sell, as opposed to actually engaging in sales activity.
Mm-hmm.
And Dudley and Goodson would actually work with teams of salespeople who would describe similar things, just as what you've described. And sometimes people would be very articulate, and other times their descriptions would be a bit vague. And so another means of engaging in research was actually using biofeedback equipment. And this was really interesting because they would do things such as study our galvanic skin response. And that's simply just a measure of the electrical conductance that goes across our skin whenever we react to a stimuli that creates an emotional response within us. And this was just one way that they use to actually validate the fact that fear is also physical. It's not just a psychological phenomenon that occurs. You can actually measure it. And yes, Roger, their research is still very
Science.
relevant today.
Yeah, yeah, that is high science, and you're right. That is incredibly still relevant today. So then the book, why Relentless?
The Relentless book came about because as time has progressed, new forms of car reluctance have emerged. And this is due to changes in the workplace and just in the business environment at large. And the other reason we needed to write a new book was actually to adapt to modern reading preferences and
Right.
the tendency to have a lower attention span. We wanted to produce something that was like a pocket-sized book that people could read, understand quickly what car reluctance is and ways to try to minimize it.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the science of sales and advocacy. So we're going to dive right in. I'm incredibly excited right now. So, okay. Next thing I wanted to ask is, there are many options for sales training out there, and many personality style assessments like we discussed before. What makes the science of sales or core reluctance different from other trainings out there?
Well, the science of sales car reluctance is really most suitable to supplement other trainings because we don't actually get into teaching people how to sell. We
Right.
focus on a core competency of overcoming the fear that serves as a barrier that prevents them from selling. And so people will use our car reluctance training with different sales training programs that they have. And this core competency that we measure is really best understood, Roger, by looking at a model of the functional sales process. And we have a slide that summarizes the functional process of selling.
Okay. Okay. All
And
righty.
that model is a great way to understand what we bring to the sales training space and how we can help support the needs of salespeople. The
Okay.
very first step in the sales process is that step of initiating contact with potential buyers. And it sounds like a very simple step, but yet it's overlooked because it tends to be assumed that people are naturally going to initiate contact. However,
Right.
that first step actually can serve as a barrier because not everybody is emotionally ready to actually
Right.
engage in meeting new people or meeting existing customers to propose a new product or service that can support them. This first
Okay.
step is also critical because if this first contact isn't made, nothing else can happen. The
Right.
second
Right.
step, once you've made contact, now you have the opportunity to introduce yourself and your company to your potential client. If you're
Mm-hmm.
working with an existing client, you can introduce the reason why you're making this call.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've done that, the third step is to engage in an informed discussion with your
Right.
client. You're
Mm-hmm.
listening to their needs and you're recommending solutions that can help them reach goals that are important to them. And once you've done that, the final step is to actually influence them to purchase your product or service because it does fulfill a need that you've recognized and a need that they have. And that way you best serve them with the products and services you have to offer.
Right.
Those are the four fundamental steps involved with any sales process,
Right.
regardless of the industry or the business setting. We
So,
focus on that first step.
mhm.
Most sales training programs will focus on the steps 2 through 4, introduce, inform, and influence. And
Right.
all of these steps are critical. They all go together as one.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you eliminate that first step, then the training that you provide to your salespeople may not be something that they optimize when they go away from the training. And you want them to put that training into use, which is
Oh,
critical, of course, especially if
yes.
you're evaluating the effectiveness of your training. What we have found, though, is that most sales programs tend to assume folks are going to already make contact because it's so essential. And
Yeah.
for that reason, a sales program might focus on things such as teaching active listening, teaching negotiating skills, or how to handle objections. But in
Yep.
each of these cases, you already are talking to someone. You're making that assumption. And
Yes.
another
Yes. That's right.
reason that car reluctance training might be overlooked, and it's because of that, it's a missing link, is because we understand that it's important to initiate contact with potential clients. However, as this next slide demonstrates, just because we know to do something, it doesn't mean we will always do it. There
Mm.
is a
Right.
difference between what we know and what we do. And that gap, that difference is car reluctance. It's
Mm-hmm.
primarily characterized by car reluctance attitudes and behaviors. And the
Mm.
more car reluctance we have, the wider that gap between what we know and what we do.
Mm. So what I'm getting from this, Teresa, thank you so much for being so thorough about that, is it sounds like training and understanding core reluctance can be applied in many areas. So for instance, if I was a small business owner trying to introduce my business or speak to fundraisers, people to raise funds for my organization, my nonprofit, approaching and initiating contact still applies. If I don't do that, funds don't come to me. If I don't tell people about my business, no one will know about it. Am I correct?
That's correct. If you don't give a voice to your products and services, who will? And
Right.
in the sales environment, whenever there's a vacuum like that, your competitors could likely step in and take over that opportunity. But yes, we must give a voice to what we do and not expect for others to come seeking us necessarily, but instead
Right.
we're proactive in our networking activity, in our engaging with others. We take
Right.
that initiative ourselves.
One of the things I also gather from what you said, Trelitha, is it sounds like this type of training in core reluctance or advocacy is really more of an amplifier to training that's already been invested in as opposed to a replacement. And I think anyone listening here who is a hiring manager or a company or a sales manager, I think this is something that will excite them to know that their efforts haven't been wasted. Their investment hasn't been wasted. There's just one missing link, to use your term, that if added can really amplify what you get in terms of return on investment for the training that you've already done. So I think that's going to resonate a lot with our audience. So thanks for sharing that. So let me
Yes,
move
and
on to another.
yes,
Oh,
that's
go
a
ahead.
very good point, Richard. And another way you can look at car reluctance training, you can look at it as an activator,
Mm,
because it helps people to do something with the
mm,
training that they have received. And that
right.
is to engage in more sales prospecting or contact initiation activities that
Mhm.
allows them to reach their goals.
Okay. Okay. So there's several reasons why a person may struggle to perform optimally, especially in sales. Um, I have a list of reasons that, according to research, the top 8 or so reasons that people struggle. Which of the following reasons are addressed by core reluctance, and what is not addressed by many other training options? And you've kind of spoken to that already. You've spoken to the fact that other training options kind of look at the stages beyond the thing link, beyond the initiation process. But let me
Right.
go over this list. Tell me what core reluctance addresses here. Um, First is inconsistent sales processes.
Yes, car reluctance training will cover this, because the more car reluctance a person is struggling with, the more you're going to see inconsistency in their sales activity. And it doesn't mean they won't be able to meet their goals from time to time, but you will
Mhm.
see that lack of consistency. And that's what you want to overcome. You want to be more consistent in
Yes.
your sales activity, in approaching potential clients or existing clients for new applications. So
Mhm.
yes, that's one that car reluctance training will cover.
What about lack of support and resources? That
Now,
sounds physical.
yes, support related issues are more of an environmental factor. So car
Mhm.
reluctance training won't actually cover the lack of support or resources.
Mhm.
However, if you struggle with a toxic level of car reluctance, you're certainly going to need more support and resources to help deal with that.
Absolutely correct. Yes. What about mismatched sales style?
Now, car reluctance doesn't cover mismatched selling styles. However, we do recognize that different selling styles are being able to adapt your selling styles to the buyer's selling style is very
Mhm.
important. And consequently, we have an assessment called the Selling Styles Profile Analysis. And this
Mhm.
measures a salesperson's different selling styles and their ability to adapt their selling style to the buyer's buying style. So we recognize that importance.
Now, you know what, you mentioned that, and I want to highlight that from a lens of customer experience. In customer experience, it's critical that everything we do, design, offer, who we hire, how we train them, everything, the center of the universe is the customer, the buyer. So everything is adapted to or shaped to the buyer. So I see similarly, again, behavioral science doing its thing, where it's BSRP is able to understand and help people analyze what their selling styles might be and how they're able to now adapt that to their buyer. Their ability to do that is a thing. So, okay, awesome. What about fear of rejection?
Yes, fear of rejection is a fairly common term. However, it's very broad. It's like an
Mm-hmm.
umbrella term that
Mm-hmm.
people will sometimes use to describe what car reluctance is. But
Mm-hmm.
car reluctance itself is much more specific. And car reluctance isn't just one thing, such as fear of
Right.
rejection. As we've indicated, as I've mentioned earlier, there's 12, we originally found 12 distinct forms of car reluctance. Now there's more, but each of these are specifically distinct, isolated behaviors that are operationally defined in a way that can be measured.
Right. Okay. Okay. What about this one seems pretty obvious, lack of product knowledge. That seems like something that the environment can take care of itself and the individual, if motivated, could take care of themselves. Is that correct?
Well, yes. Lack of product knowledge, that's not something that car reluctance measures or that's treated in the workshops that we provide. However, it is a factor that can lead to lower productivity. So it is
Mhm.
something that we measure on our sales assessment, but it's not a form of car reluctance. It can mimic one, but it's not a form of car reluctance.
Okay. So it can impersonate core reluctance, but it's not core reluctance.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Wow. An imposter, for want of a better term.
It is
Okay.
indeed.
Our next factor is ineffective time management.
Now, again, this is another very important factor that can reduce your level of sales productivity if you're highly distracted. It's not a form of car reluctance, but it is something that we measure. And it is an imposter in the sense that it mimics car reluctance and that it leads
Mm.
to lower sales performance, but it's something that's not related to fear.
Okay. Okay. Poor communication skills.
Again, a very good a factor that can influence productivity. This one is not directly related to car reluctance either. However, if you are struggling with car reluctance,
Mm.
someone may have the perception that you have poor communication skills when
Mm.
really the underlying cause is fear-based.
Right. And the last factor is lack of prospecting. But I think it's clear that that core reluctance definitely addresses that.
Yes, that's right on target. Car reluctance clearly is a measure of a lack of prospecting. But not only that, we've taken that factor, Roger, and we have studied it in depth, unlike anyone has done. And that's why we have been able to help make a difference for individuals and organizations because we're so specific with so much detail into the
Mhm.
causes of lower prospecting activities.
Okay. Okay. All right. Oh, wow. Okay. So core reluctance does address a lot of things that tie directly to activity and productivity. So that's important because my next question is going to tease out the needs of leadership and C-suite and those who write the checks for training. Because they want to understand the ROI. They want to understand how is effectiveness of this type of training measured, and are there specific types of metrics or KPIs that could be tracked to assess performance?
Yes, absolutely. One of the key metrics that we recommend monitoring is the amount of outbound calls that a salesperson is making. And we'll collect baseline data on this prospecting activity before a workshop begins. And then we'll measure the same data after the workshop, typically for a 4 to 8 week time frame. And this gives us an indication if outbound activity or prospecting activity has increased
Mm.
following the workshop. And that's
Right.
very important. Other metrics that we measure involve sales productivity, specifically related to
Okay.
outcome measures. And these
Okay.
objective measures can be things like amount of revenue generated on a monthly
Mhm.
basis, amount of commissions earned, or
Mhm.
number of sales units sold on a monthly basis or over some interval that's important to a company. And we will do this if it's a training involved, before and after training as well. So you can see the effectiveness of the training and if it made a difference for your organization. And Roger,
Right.
typically what we find when we do these studies, we generally find that the amount of return on investment more than covers the investment you made in training based on the
Mm.
increase in revenue that you've now generated.
And that also becomes something that continues way beyond the investment for the training. So, for instance, what I'm getting to is if I learned that based on my core reluctance profile, that I have these inhibitors or obstacles to my performance, and we take corrective action, my sales manager or my coach helps me take corrective action, it means that beyond the training, not just for that first month, but for that rest of that year, I am now able to continue to produce. So again, the return on investment continues long beyond the actual training. So I think our leaders, our HR managers, our C-suiters, and our sales managers will appreciate that type of ROI on any investment. So thanks for sharing that. I want to discuss some quotes from the book because I've been doing my reading, of course, before this interview,
Yes.
and kind of get your feedback. Now, one of the original scientists, Mr. Dudley, says U.S. salespeople could be closing as much as 40 to 60% more sales if they were more comfortable with prospecting or engaging people, networking, and other types of contact initiation. Why is it so much of a difference, and how does that translate to dollars? And if you have any examples, that'd be great for our audience.
Yes, that's a very good question. And the existence of this fear that we've been discussing can be very frustrating. However, the reason that improving car reluctance or minimizing it can lead to such an improvement in performance is because so many times, Roger, car reluctance simply goes unseen as an emotional phenomenon. And because it goes unseen, it tends to go untreated. And when car reluctance goes untreated over time, it can lead to habitually low sales performance and even
Compound.
high sales turnover rates. And
Yes, I can
yes,
see.
we do have some examples of what that can look like. In this next slide, we actually studied prospecting activity or the amount of outbound calls that a team of salespeople were engaged in. And this study actually covered 17 different offices within a region. Two of
Okay.
the offices, the salespeople at those two offices actually attended car reluctance corrective training. And those individuals are represented by the blue line that is shown there. The other
Okay.
15 offices, their sales team received no training whatsoever, and they're represented by the red line.
Okay.
You will, you will also see two vertical lines on this chart. That first vertical line is when the car reluctance workshop took place. And you can see prior to that workshop, the sales performance by both teams was pretty even. There wasn't, the baseline data was relatively equivalent. After training, you see a significant difference in the level of outbound calls that are being made. You'll notice
Yes.
on the blue line, the sales people over an 8-week period actually experienced an increase in their sales outbound calls by 106%. And again, this is over an 8-week period. And I should mention, this training actually occurred during the COVID shutdown period where we were all sheltered in place. And that took place at that second vertical line. And you'll
Okay.
notice that even in spite of the economic situation that was produced by COVID, these people were still productive compared to those who received no training at all. And when you compare these two teams together, the higher performing team actually increased their level of outbound calls by 69% over those who had no training whatsoever.
Huh. Now, there's something I want to mention here because this really resonates with me in my sales career as well. Because I started out in the financial services industry. So insurance was one of the first things I learned how to sell. And when you're research, I'm sure you're familiar with how that looks. But in insurance, what I learned very quickly was conversion rates. So the more appointments that I had, the more appointments that would actually stick on the calendar. And out of those that stuck on the calendar, there's a certain percentage of those that I will close and then capture checks. So all I had to do was stay in the right target market and have enough calls to make so that I can make my weekly targets in terms of the amount of money I'd like to make. So to see the impact of this type of training improve people's outbound calls 106% literally means that the revenue that they can generate for themselves significantly increases because, again, based on conversion rates, more calls means more appointments, which means more closes. And so that, I think any hiring manager, any C-suiter, any company, shucks, if I'm a nonprofit trying to raise funds and my fundraising team, outreach team gets better at initiating contact with possible fundraisers, that just spells blessings for a nonprofit. So I like this slide a lot. I really like this slide. It's very, very impactful. So
yes, and you're
okay,
absolutely right, Roger, about that. And another thing that comes out of this research is when you can minimize the amount of car reluctance within your organization, you can actually begin to redefine what a top producer looks like for your business. And that's what these companies were able to do.
Do you have any slides on, like numbers, like in terms of there we go.
Yes, yes, just ask. Indeed.
I'll let you break it down for us.
Yes, in this particular study, I had mentioned earlier that we also measure things such as revenue earned or commissions gained. And this particular study looked at the influence of car reluctance on the monthly average commissions that were earned. And this group was actually categorized into two groups. Those who were in the lower percentile of car reluctance and those who were in the upper percentile of car reluctance. Those who had less car reluctance averaged over $12,000 in monthly commissions compared to those who had higher levels of car reluctance. And this increase in productivity actually translated into an average of over $53,000 in annual commissions per salesperson. This made a huge difference for this company.
Wow. That's close to the average annual income of an American household, 53,000 in net gain per person. Wow, that's something else, and I'm sure it differs by industry, but that's still significant compared to if I was making just over 8,000 and I can add another $2,000, $3,000 or $4,000 a month. That's huge. Wow, that's powerful. I have another quote I want to ask you about, Trelitha. It's from the book Relentless. Studies show that most salespeople experience difficulty with up to 5 forms of compromising prospecting or initiating behavior. How many types of hidden barriers are there? according to core reluctance research. And
There,
then maybe you can tell us those 5 types that seems to affect most salespeople.
yes, there are now 16 distinct forms of car reluctance that have
Wow.
been identified. And the 5 most common types that tend to affect salespeople begins with the yielder car reluctance. That is by far the most common form of car reluctance. And yielder tendencies, that measures the tendency to avoid engaging in sales opportunities because of the feeling of being too pushy or being intrusive.
That sounds familiar. Yep.
Yes.
Sounds
The,
familiar.
the next scale is called arranging payment. And that's the tendency to avoid closing a sale. It's something we call close reluctance. Once you've initiated the sale, sometimes individuals are more comfortable just maintaining a rapport, and they're more
Mhm.
comfortable waiting for the client to ask for the sale instead of them taking that initiative and being assertive enough to ask for the sale themselves.
Okay,
A
if I were
third common
Catholic,
form,
1 second, Trelitha. If I
yes,
were Catholic, this would be the moment I give confession because you touched on when I started in sales,
yes.
that yield attendance and that closing core reluctance. Those were the 2 weakest things I had in the beginning of my sales career. Now I just ask for money before I even present. That's how bold I am now, but that's different. So go ahead. What's
Yes,
the third?
those are potent. And the third one is called overprepare. And that's
Uh,
that tendency to excessively engage in preparing to sell, maybe getting your notes together, getting your script together, whatever the case might be. But you use that as a means to avoid actually making the seller, actually making the contact with a client. It's just a way to stay within your comfort zone and avoid actually initiating contact with clients, potential
oh,
clients as well.
okay. So I was 3 for 3 in the beginning. Okay, I'm
Yes.
pretty so far. What's number 4? What's the fourth most popular?
The fourth one is online prospecting. And this is one of the newer forms of car reluctance that's in our book, Relentless. This is that tendency to feel uncomfortable when you have to initiate contact online, maybe doing a video call. Sometimes
Mm,
people prefer to be face to face, in
mm,
person, but
mm.
using technology for some people is very uncomfortable.
Yes,
And then the
yes.
fifth most common scale is called complex selling. And that's a sales scale that measures discomfort with engaging in more complex sales negotiations. You
Mhm.
might be dealing with multiple decision makers, and
Yes,
you might be dealing with an extended sales cycle that's involved. This might
right,
also involve more than one team member, and that's why
mm,
it's considered a complex sale.
right.
For some people, that's something they're just not comfortable being a part of.
Hmm. Yeah, okay, so I'm 3 for 5. So 60% that's a D. I think a more important question to ask is there is there corrective action for a person or a manager or a coach or someone, to address some of these tendencies so that we could be more productive?
Yes, indeed, there is. And really, that begins with first assessing what forms of car reluctance you have, what forms you're struggling with. And then
Mm,
we do have training and follow up coaching that's available to then help you manage those levels of car reluctance. And this training, Roger, doesn't require you to change your personality per se, but it
mhm.
allows you to manage your level of fear enough so you can engage in networking or contact initiation activities as you need to get those ratios you were talking about earlier.
Yes,
Very
yes.
important.
Extremely important. I'm really glad you said that because I as someone in sales I have an analytical background, and by nature, personality wise, I'm quite analytical. So when I started selling, I was great at giving all the information about everything I knew to a possible or prospective buyer. The problem with that is it drowns people in information paralysis. And so I didn't close very much. So what I had to do was customize my approach to who I'm selling to. So if I was selling to someone who would be more knowledgeable about, let's say, financial literacy, then I was able to have a conversation bespoke to that. But if I'm speaking to someone who is ignorant about financial literacy, then I could simplify the terms that I use and make sure that it connects with them through storytelling or whatever, in order to meet them where they are so they can make a decision that works in both our favor. So I appreciate you sharing that, and that there is corrective action, and the training doesn't just identify tendencies, but it also offers support, ongoing support, so that people can know what to do to take corrective action. Or it sounds also like the training can also support sales managers and sales coaches, or even training managers, on how to manage each sales team member bespoke to their profile of core reluctance. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that enables you to utilize your resources in more of an optimal way. Absolutely.
Yes.
Because some corrective techniques may work well for some types of car reluctance and not others. So
Correct.
having that roadmap, if you will, really helps managers manage their time better, as well as their resources, their financial resources.
So, okay, so we've talked a lot about sales specifically for those people in sales careers or sales related careers, whether hiring salespeople, training salespeople, leading salespeople, or being a salesperson. What about, how does core reluctance apply to, say, leadership?
That's an excellent question, Roger. And it really begs the point that it's important for us to understand that we really are all engaged in selling related activities to some form or fashion. For example,
Yep.
in leadership, car reluctance can cause a leader to avoid communicating with others within their organization as needed to accomplish business goals that are important to them. For
Mm-hmm.
example, there could be an issue that arises in the workplace, and
Mm-hmm.
a leader struggling with car reluctance might decide, well, let's just overlook that and ignore that because I don't want to get involved with it. And
Right.
that's not conducive to perhaps building morale and reaching your business objectives.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And also to tie that to customer experience, Trelitha, in
Mhm.
customer experience, um, we have a process called customer journey analysis or customer journey mapping, but it's more of an analysis than a mapping alone. And in that process, it's a very cross-functional process. We can't come in and tell a company what to do without having the rest of the team as a part of that process. And without the ability to engage cross-functionally as a C-suite or as a business leader, like you said, you can't get your business goals met. And it's not great for morale if the only reason you keep hitting a wall is because me, the director, won't speak to the other director about something that we can both solve together. So this is an incredibly important thing to know, that core reluctance can help leaders identify any gaps that debilitate their ability to lead and be effective, and as a result help the organization progress.
Yes.
So how does core reluctance also apply for hiring or recruitment practices or companies or
Well,
people?
in this case, car reluctance can cause recruiters to limit the number of prospective job applicants that they contact or that they communicate with. So the
Mm.
car reluctance profile of recruiters can influence their own level of productivity in obtaining good recruits for the organization.
Oh, so if I'm hearing you correctly, if I am a hiring manager, my own personal levels of core reluctance can affect who I choose or who I relate to hire. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and how many times you're actually engaging with different job applicants. The number of job applicants within your applicant pool can be influenced by call reluctance. And when we're dealing with recruiters, we actually call this recruiting reluctance, the very same principle, but instead of selling, it's recruiting. And of course, recruiting too is a form of sales.
That's deep. So this should be helpful for people who are into recruiting. Okay. So what about, how would call reluctance help someone who's in fundraising, small business, or a nonprofit?
Yes, in fundraising, call reluctance can cause individuals to limit the number of prospective donors that they're contacting. Small business owners can cause you to avoid opportunities you have to promote your business in the marketplace. And that might be even giving speeches or engaging in networking activities. Very important.
Yeah, that because many small business owners are really good at the thing they produced, whether it's a service or a product, but they're not very good at promoting the solution that they offer to customers, or prospective customers, if that makes sense. So I can see where that gap can be for many people. For instance, if I make cell phones, I may be great at designing cell phones that work exactly the way people want to use it, but I may not be good at selling to Samsung that they should buy my design to use in their menu of options. So that I see how it connects to the fundraising and small businesses as well. So what are some use cases for call reluctance or advocacy, or as I read in the book, visibility management, for those folks who are not in sales? We've talked about some of them already. For instance, like a job seeker, or an academic, or even a medical professional.
Yes. For job seekers, they're selling their knowledge, skills, and abilities. Academics might be selling their ideas for a new grant proposal. Very common. Those who are seeking a job promotion within the office, again, they're promoting their skills and abilities to those who can reward them. Even people in professional services like CPAs, attorneys, or engineers, they too must build a customer base. They must engage in promotional activities along with medical professionals as well.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like the only place call reluctance may not be useful is in babies. That's a general sense I'm getting. Babies and things.
Yes, well, I think babies are pretty good at selling. All they've got to do is cry and they'll pretty much get what they want many times.
That would be right. Yeah, they don't need, they have low levels of call reluctance for sure.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So in closing, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, this has been incredibly helpful, exciting, and eye-opening. Why should an individual or a nonprofit or even a for-profit business understand call reluctance? And what are 3 compelling reasons to do so urgently?
Well, it's important because your business, be it a nonprofit or for-profit business, it doesn't really exist until you sell something. And in order to sell something, you must be engaged with potential clients, and you must do that on a consistent basis. And when you ask, well, what are some reasons why I should understand call reluctance better and act on it in an urgent manner, there's really 2 perspectives you can take on that, Roger. And one perspective is to consider, well, what are the current market or economic conditions? And the other perspective is just to consider, what are your own business conditions? What's the state of your own business affairs? And I would really focus more on what are your own business conditions? What are the things that you are dealing with within your organization? And
Right.
I would make those three compelling reasons really three questions for businesses
Okay.
to take to heart and to consider. And the
Mm-hmm.
first question is there a need for your products and services? Is there a need for that? And then,
Mm-hmm.
is it important to you as a business owner to increase your customer base? And
Ah,
if so, is it important for you to do that now? And those are internal questions that we really need to ponder, because if we don't consider those questions, it really doesn't matter what's going on in the marketplace. That's
yes.
not going to sustain us on a
Yes.
long-term basis. And
That's
this
right.
just reminds me of something a eminent scholar once said. His name is Dr. W. Edward Deming. He once
Mm-hmm.
simply said, Roger, that success is optional. It's
Mm.
something we have control over. And when companies consider these three fundamental questions, it's really up to them to decide if learning more about car reluctance and doing something about it is an imperative for them, if it's something that they should urgently attend to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Trelitha, thank you so much for participating in this. Ladies and gentlemen, we've decided that this is going to be the first installment of several. So stay tuned on more core reluctance related episodes of the IAM CX podcast. But Trelitha, I want to thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you will have access to in the chat, in the live chat, and on our website, um, an EKG, a core reluctance EKG that helps you identify very generically what your potential core reluctance tendencies are. It's very, very simple. Will take you very, very short time to get it done. And actually, I want to recommend this as I stretch in front of the camera. I want to recommend Relentless as a resource for all of you. Trelitha Bryant and Suzanne Dudley are the co-authors of this. This 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 blew my mind. I saw myself in many pages. I'm thankful that experience, beat a lot out of uh, removed a lot of the tendencies that I started out sales with. I was able to remove that before reading this, but this helps me still because as a director of customer experience, I'm only involved in complex sales, and so this really helps me understand where I am. I've taken it already, and I know exactly what corrective action I need to take in order to improve my approaches when it comes to initiating contact, initiating strategic partnerships, you name it. So I see the value of Relentless. I see the value of core reluctance training. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking part in this episode of the IAM CX podcast. And I thank you, Trelitha Brand, so much for your insight, your experience, and your willingness to share. And everyone, have a great day. And as usual, go win.
Thank you too. Thanks
And
for having me.